Alright, another video. Hope you guys are doing good. Today I would like to talk about the rising problem of nihilism in mainly the United States, but in other countries as well. I mainly always talk about the United States because I'm in the United States, so it's a little bit easier to talk to people on a day-to-day basis and see how people are feeling in current political and socio-cultural climates. So I guess where I would want to start off is exactly where the origins of nihilism really start. Movements like existentialism, which I will explain what those are. Actually, I should do that right now. So nihilism typically is associated with a type of, can be associated with an indifference of the world, or that the world has no inherent meaning or purpose. There's typically three branches of this type of denying of meaning, at least in philosophical terms, which is nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism. You could kind of throw in pessimism in there, which pessimism is naturally just everything negative that can happen will happen. So it's kind of like more of a negative version of Murphy's Law, that everything that can happen will happen, rather that every negative possible thing that can happen will happen. It is just a guarantee. So with nihilism really has to do with a almost indifference or disdain for the world, more of a disparity for the world around us. There is no purpose, there is no God, there is no heaven or hell, there is nothing but the heat death of the universe. Typically not associated with objective truths. There is nothing to seek, there is nothing to find. Your only purpose really is procreation and death, and taxes in between, right? And having a authoritative government that is promoting its ideology on you, demanding for obedience, a theocratic system, maybe a religion, etiquette, proper etiquette, rules, laws, regulations, institutions that are basically delaying the inevitable. Maybe a nihilist doesn't necessarily want to deny that there are objective truths, but doesn't see any of them. Denies that there really is probably nothing out there that is wanting us to survive or exist. The universe created us out of purely chance or illogicalness, or maybe just a pure indifference to creating us and things like that, right? With really no solution. Existentialists can kind of believe that those aspects are true, but they assert of creating your own meaning, which is out of existentialists. The famous existentialist being Jean-Paul Sartre, who said that existence precedes essence, a big philosophical belief before his time, which is around the 1900s, right around World War I, World War II, or after World War II. He had believed that the old philosophy was that essence precedes existence, that there is a tangible teleos, which is kind of where Aristotle brings his things, is that everything in existence has a purpose. A walnut tree or a walnut seed becomes a walnut tree. That's its teleos, that's its purpose. As a human, it develops from a baby into a full-grown person, and then like, like whatever type of job it's supposed to have or whatever type of purpose it's supposed to have in order to create this like meta narrative. With Hegel, you have all these different things. You're going to have the subjective spirit, which is like subjective consciousness. You then come together, you create an objective spirit, which is like states and religions and philosophies and stuff, and then you conjugate and you create all of those things together. And then spirit actualizes itself. Basically, the oneness of human consciousness kind of comes into fruition, right? The existentialists reject all of this. They say that there is no divinity, no divine purpose, nothing that will force you out of bed, nothing that really should get you out of bed, other than the meaning that you already create, right? This means that you are not bound. You are free. You have the free agency to do whatever. A big thing within existentialism is authenticity, being authentic to yourself. Whatever person that you are creating yourself, whatever person that you want to have be molded within you, you will create. You will create that person, and you will be that person. That is the most important part, is that in any circumstance, you have the authority, you have the autonomy, and you have the moral responsibility. Not moral in the sense of good and bad, but inauthentic and authentic. Whoever you are being, you should be that person 100%, and you should not be hypocritical in the way of being something different than who you actually are, who you are developing yourself. So if you develop yourself as a communist one day, and then you develop yourself as a Buddhist, or you develop yourself as a socialist, or a Democrat or Republican, or any of these types of things, if you identify yourself as that, then you are being inauthentic, because you don't really believe that. Now, of course, it's a difference between creating your own values and then eventually believing in something else, but that would be more authentic than you merely are one thing, and then you're another thing, and then you're another thing, and then you're another thing, right? The existence precedes essence, but the existence that you had first was out of nothing, and then only after you were created out of nothing can you begin to create yourself as anything. I think that's a good way of thinking about it, hopefully. And then the absurdist position. Let me get the book. I have it right here. Famous Albert Camus, right? It's kind of related in The Plague, as considered kind of an absurdist or an existentialist, though he went on record not saying that he exactly liked those positions. He thought that most philosophers were still tied into a meta-cognitive, or not cognitive, but a meta-narrative position of trying to find some overarching theme as to the purpose of existence, which is most philosophers, right, up until the postmodern period, around the death of Nietzsche and a little bit before, so around like the 1800s, sometimes even people in the 1700s had believed that, but the typical association was that there is some type of divinity or some type of purpose or some type of virtues and stuff that everyone is trying to find. With Albert Camus, he is trying to find more of a position as to bear the weight of absurdism, bear the weight of this tragic life that we have, that is without really any purpose, without any meaning, and does not care for you in any way, shape, and form. You are here one day, and then you die in a car accident the next day, and that is it. There is nothing in between that. There's nothing before that gave you purpose. There's no essence to you. Before that, your existence is merely just an accident. Those are the ideas. But he says that is liberation in the sense that you should imagine Sisyphus happy. One of his famous books. imagine that you are constantly pushing up a boulder for all of eternity, and then you merely get some satisfaction of being able to push that boulder up at the hill, and then it just rolls back down. Now in that story, in the Sisyphus story, he is happy, at least, and it's kind of hinted that he is happy, that he's smiling maniacally and laughing, and the first inclination is to think that something is wrong with him, that he has lost his mind or he has gone insane. And to a certain extent he has, of the absurd, of pointing to the absurd. And there's kind of a similar perspective in Nietzsche's Eternal Reoccurrence, where there is an evil demon that curses a person and says that you are doomed to live the exact same life that you had already lived and know every single choice that you're going to choose, and there is nothing different that you can do about it. And for one person, this is a damned curse. You evil demon, you have destroyed everything. I will be tormented for the rest of my life. Whereas then the other person thinks that this devil is an angel, that he has given me the greatest gift of all, that I am to be able to live this life, the exact same. And I think there is kind of a beauty in that statement, to know that you lived your life as fully as you could according to your own terms and according to what you decided to create and what you gave your life a type of meaning. There is a heavy tetherness to this world, since a lot of it, there is not a metaphysical next world, that there's not really a spiritual world, a heaven or hell. Hell is other people, as Sartre said, but that you should focus on this naturalism. You should focus on the world around you. You should focus on caring for other people. You should focus on the sunrises and the sunsets. A core feature in The Stranger by Albert Camus is this sun figure, is kind of the movement of this suffering that is in the background constantly. But the sun makes him hot. The sun is what caused him to kill the Muslim person or the Arab person, and ultimately had him on trial. It's what makes him uncomfortable. It's what makes him angry and irritated about his mother when she died, is that it's kind of this like omnipotent force that is the central protagonist against him. That it's not necessarily the events in life, but it's the uncomfortability of just like an innate built suffering, that the sun rises again and it rises again and it rises again. That's the eternal reoccurrence of just general suffering in the universe. It's a core, tangible part of existence. Without the sun, you do not have the earth, and you do not have the moon. And if it's out of orbit, like we are destroyed. Like the heat death in the universe that is supposedly going to be here in 6 billion years, there will be nothing left. Giant star that ceases to exist and makes us cease to exist, right? But that suffering, at least keeping the metaphor intact, is reoccurrent, and the way to combat it is to embrace it as much as possible, deriving some type of meaning of yourself with this purpose, knowing that the suffering is with you. Nietzsche puts it that the greatest pleasure that you can receive in life is only through the greatest suffering that you receive in life. So opposite to the hedonist, where you want to decrease the amount of suffering that you experience so as to maximize the pleasure, Nietzsche says no, the pleasure and the suffering are one. They are one and the same. So if you decrease pleasure, you try to decrease as much suffering as possible, but there is a perpetual boredom and a lesser of your own purpose that you are creating for yourself. But if you want to increase the most amount of pleasure, you have to increase the most amount of pain. To have the most amount of pain and to have the most amount of suffering, is to have the most amount of purpose, right? It's kind of like what Socrates said with living the good life. Living the good life, living the good examined life is the only life worth living. An unexamined life is not a life worth living at all. Now, I think, in my opinion, I don't think it's necessarily it's easier said than done. It's more motivational in the time span to allow you kind of in a crunch, that nothing matters. Well, nothing matters. I can do really whatever I want. And I think to some degree it's okay. But I think for most people, it promotes mainly nihilism. They will not flip to absurdism or existentialism, or realizing that I'm free of these consequences, right? I'm free of these chains, and I can actually be free to do what I want. But I think most people are still trying to search for meaning. It is a natural, innate human process. We want to find meaning. And it is sad to look in the world and see how many people do not have meaning in their lives, even out of creating it. And I don't necessarily believe the notion of existentialism or absurdism or nihilism that there is no purpose. I think there is a purpose for us in the grand scheme of things, even if it is hard to look at and often seemed unplausible that there is. I think there still is. However, I think that we have tied so much meaning and purpose into trying to identify the meaning and purpose that it becomes muddled, right? You do not value this life and what it does give you because you're waiting for the next, which is a point that Nietzsche promotes in, I think, the Genealogy of Morals, and even parts of The Gay Science, which is what I'm currently reading of his, which is really good. But he's talking about how there is this notion of, I don't need to care about this world as much because I'm waiting for a greater reward. I'm waiting for something greater. I'm delaying myself for something greater. And he thinks that that's not necessarily moral, because you're merely doing good in order to receive a reward, right? That's a very famous atheist position, that if God or the fear of an eternal punishment is the only thing that is keeping you good, then you are not a moral person. And a lot of Christians and other religious people would also believe that that's the same thing, because you're not being transformed with your heart, right? And I think that there is some importance of believing in this life as well. In looking at a sunrise, looking at a sunset, looking at the clouds, enjoying the rain, jumping in puddles, looking at the flowers, feeling happy with the world around it, or the world around you, even when it does feel like there is more suffering in the world that then is bearable or tolerable, especially when you look at the media. When you look at all the wars and the poverty and the famine and the just absolute annihilation and destruction and the hatred that we have and the natural disasters, and that it feels like that humans have to go against every obstacle that nature constantly throws at us, and same with other animals, right? I think that some part of a remedy, not fully, because it doesn't work entirely, is that a Schopenhauerian perspective would come into play, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, is recognizing that everyone suffers, that we all are going to die in the end. And that's sad. That is sad that you are here and then you are not, you are present and then you are not. And that cognition and being able to think and being able to process and having experiences is the gift of life. If you were not to have those gifts and to experience it in some regard, then number one, you would not be able to think about these sort of things. But also you would not be able to experience any of these things. I don't know if I've already said this, but Schopenhauer, he said that it's kind of similar with Nietzsche, is that when you have animals, lower cognitive able animals, have the inability to be able to think long term. Most of them have the inability to think long term. Of course, there are exceptions with animals that we know, especially now, rather than his time. They're able to experience less pain, but also less pleasure. But they do stick more within the moment. They are more present within the moment. They experience more of the moment, and we do not. When we constantly keep thinking, we constantly keep analyzing, and we ruin our moment, and we're not able to think about it as fondly going back, or maybe we do think about it more fondly, but we didn't enjoy it as much in that moment than it was supposed to be. And sometimes we get sad about not being able to go back into a moment, but we don't make any more new moments, and we don't really experience as much. And I think that our societies, especially in the United States, wants us to produce constantly and wants us to muffle those senses so as to keep producing for the people that are able to experience it the most. It's typically not been the lower and middle and even middle upper classes who are working for people that have way more money than them. Because we are able to experience more pain, yes, but we are also able to experience a deeper pleasure and maybe a satisfaction of at least saying, hey, maybe this doesn't matter, but at least I did it. And that's what I said with the Jean Baudrillard video, is that at least that you are able to experience it. At least you're able to, even if the Matrix is true and maybe this is all merely an illusion, sensory perceptions that are just creating this feeble intellect that is not able to process the absolute meaningless of everything, at least I am still able to move forward and try and do things. Recognizing the suffering, the universal suffering that everything in this world has to experience, creates such a deeper level of empathy and compassion and understanding for everything around us, that everything was thrown into the world and thrown into existence and now has to make the most of it, of being here for such a short time, that everything ends in entropy and everything ends in blackness. Yeah. But I think that can be used with good. I do think that we still have a purpose. I don't entirely buy the notion of nihilism and all these things, but for people that do, I think that you can find comfort. And I think that nihilism can be beat. I think a lot of people are still trying to search for something, and the struggle is your salvation. The pain, the suffering is your salvation. It is the way to reach fulfillment. I think the Buddhists and I think Christians are especially right on those fronts. That Christ, when he died on the cross, he gave the most amount of suffering to create the most amount of reward. There's heavy metaphysical implications of that, even if you do not believe in a metaphysical. But that's all I wanted to say. I hope that video kind of helped if any, and made sense. Hopefully, cohesiveness was on par. I rant a lot, but hopefully I tied it back in. So, have a good one. I hope you guys have a good day. Make sure leave a like, subscribe, tune in for upcoming videos. It might be a little bit because I still need to read a couple more books, just so I can then maybe make some more videos on it. So yeah, all right. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. All right, and have a good day.